back in late 90s, I had an opportunity and privilege to serve First Nations congregations way back in Alberta, in the middle of Alberta. The church was located in the middle of four First Nations Indian tribe reservation, Plain Cree Indian reservation, and the name of the town used to be Obima. Anybody know that name? Yeah, some of you know that. And now they have changed the name to Muscovich, which means welcome. So I was there for about 2 years as sort of interim minister to serve there. And my family and I were living in a church manse about a few blocks away from the church, well, Samson United Church, that's where I was ministered. And we were kind of remotely about 2 or 3 blocks away from the church. The church was located right at the center of the Indian reservation right over there, and we were just about 2 or 3 blocks right off the reservation. And we, kind of remote area, like we only had a few houses, and there was a construction company, there was a corner store, and also there was RC&D detachment, and there was only one highway crossed from south and north to south and Ponoka and to north and Taskwan, and there was one traffic light throughout the whole area. Quite a remote area place. So I served there for about 2 years and had a wonderful ministry, quite challenging, but blessings at the same times, and had many memories as well. Now, this happened on one Sunday. I think it was a few weeks after I arrived at church. And after the church worship service, one of the long-time elder of the church, who happened to be the last hereditary chief of the Samson Nation, John Samson, came up to me and he congratulated me on that service. So he said, "Richard, I want to give you an Indian name." Indian name, right? So, now you have to understand that being given an Indian name as an outsider from a hereditary chief was considered to be the highest honor as an outsider, right? And it was only given to the people who had been dedicated service for many, many years in that in service, and also known and respected by the whole tribe. So I was quite surprised to hear that, and so I was thinking to myself, is that, boy, I must have really preached well that morning. Really inspired him a great deal. So he came up to me and he put both of his hands, because he's kind of 6'3" tall, and put both of his hands on my shoulders. And while everybody was like watching in silence, like they were anticipating, and put both of his hands on my shoulder, and he said, "Richard, from now on, I will call you Ricky." So it was just a plain joke. And in my obliviousness, I was expecting names something like Sitting Bull or Eagle Eye, until I realized that it was just playing a joke. So from there onward, I was known as Reverend Ricky. You see, that was his way of truly welcoming me into his church and into the community. He has kind of reaffirmed and kind of acknowledged my call into their lives. And through this simple gesture, this wise elder's simple gesture that I have found committed. I found that kind of my recognition that God has called into this ministry, and from this simple act of hospitality by this wise elder. And for the next 2 years, he has been my friend and my mentor and my personal community. As a stranger, as an outsider, as an alien, they have welcomed me into their lives and embraced me as one of their neighbors. So we are on the theme of radical hospitality this morning, continuing with that theme, and in the book of Leviticus. The book of Leviticus. Anybody pronounce that well? Leviticus. So I just want to say that that book, the Leviticus, is kind of unfamiliar to me. It's not one of my most popular books to preach from the Bible. In fact, it ranks bottom 2 or 3 in the most popular books in the Bible to preach from. The book of Numbers takes that last honor. Did anybody ever read Book of Numbers? Good for you. Bless your heart. Okay, it's kind of great. It's not that it's not an important book. I mean, it is an important book. It's just that I don't find it all that exciting to preach from. Like, it's kind of opposite of Book of Revelation of John. And that's exciting. That's fun. That's a scary book to preach from. All that kind of weird and crazy, all the symbols and talking about all these visions and all this, what's happening with this ancient dragon falling from the sky and the chasing after pregnant woman. That's what's in, if you haven't read that, that's in there. And that emerging of 4 horsemen and 7 trumpets, 7 bowls, and then plague after plague and judgment and battle, Armageddon, and all this number of beasts, 666. That's exciting, that's fun, that's scary to preach from, right? In fact, I preached actually a sermon series on Book of Revelation, 7 parts. Book of Revelation is called, I titled it as Cracking the Code. And the first part was on Apocalypse Now. That was the first part of that, and was inspired by the movie Avengers Endgame. Anybody seen that movie? Some of you? Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So that's an exciting book to preach from, right? I mean, it's like you don't have to really imagine too much. You just read like science fiction, right? You don't have to imagine very too much. Where the book of Leviticus, it's like a bunch of regulations and rules and laws and all of that is based on regarding religious rituals and relationships. I mean, you can only imagine so much with that, right? It's just, so I just want to let it out there for now. It's not one of my favorite books to preach from. I just want to put it out there for folks. But I was given this text to preach from, so I had no choice. So that's where I'm at this point. Okay? But if you want to, but if we read a bit more, and it gets a bit more interesting. The book gets a bit more interesting and kind of relevant for us, especially the chapter 19. And of course, chapter 18, verse 22 is quite well known. You all know that verse, right? So you can just Google it later. Okay, you all know that part. I'm happy that I was not given that text to preach from. The book of 19, it gets kind of interesting and relevant for us. If you read more than once or twice, it gets. When I read the book, chapter 19, there are 2 verses jumped out at me. Verse 18, where it says, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Now we all know that command, right? Jesus has taught us. It's part of golden command from Jesus. Says, "Hear, O Israel, your God is." You can all. And shall love. Oh no, didn't happen. "Hear, O Israel, your God is, Lord, your God is," okay. And then it goes like this, it goes, "You shall love your Lord, your God with all your heart, and your mind, and your soul, and your spirit, and everything, and then you shall love your neighbor as yourself." So we know that command really well. You know it, and I know it, and people outside church know it. It's kind of well-known command for everybody out there. You don't have to Christian to understand that command. So I found that in right over there. So you know, that's kind of new. It's right there, over there. It's like, in fact, we like that command so much in our church. We like that so much. We use that as our mission statement: loving God and loving our neighbors. That's our mission statement. It sums up the whole command, all the rules and regulations, the whole entire Bible. Even if you're not a Christian, that you get to know. And if you forget everything about commands and regulations and the laws in the whole Bible, knowing except this one, love God and love your neighbors as yourself, I mean, you get to go to heaven, right? All that, right? So you just don't need to, all that. So that's quite an important command. It's a pretty significant command, right? But it's quite surprising to find it stuck in between other commands, kind of buried underneath all this. And I almost missed that because the first reading, I didn't get it, and the second reading, it's right over there. So I'm just wondering, what is this like well-known command doing under buried? Like you can almost miss it if you don't read it carefully. It's hidden like somewhere around there. It's like, some people probably, it's like some writers that probably put it, kind of accidentally just placed it over there, like, kind of a leftover sentence, or sort of a kind of dangling sentence, like, sometimes it's kind of afterthought, kind of accidentally put it over there, kind of side dish, sort of. Anybody been to a buffet restaurant? Yeah, you all been to a buffet restaurant? Yeah, you always find a buffet restaurant, there's a kind of side dish, it's kind of oddly out of place, it's like shouldn't be there, nobody knows if everybody's there just taking up the space, right? So anybody been to a Chinese buffet restaurant? Yeah. So what's French fry thing during Chinese buffet restaurants? So I find Chinese buffet restaurant over there, and they put a plate of French fry, it's over, it's taking the space over there, and I was like, right. So why is it there, right? Hey, there's an empty spot over there. We'll just throw in a plate of French fries, right? I mean, if I really wanted to eat French fries, I would go to McDonald's or like that. But so that's kind of my first kind of impression right over there. Like, what's this great French fry or great command kind of hidden and doing, buried in between this whole bunch of commands to how to relate one another. So that was kind of my personal kind of surprise at the initial 2 or 3 readings. Now what's more surprising is that verse 34, where he says, "You shall love the alien as yourself." You shall love the alien as yourself. Now that's kind of unfamiliar to me as well. Like, I know you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I know that a lot. Everybody knows that, right? But you shall love the alien as yourself. That's kind of, right? Haven't really thought about that. Okay, you shall love the alien as yourself. And we understand that broadly speaking, when you understand that when we say that we shall love our neighbors as ourselves, we understand that as like including everybody, right? Like settlers and like temporary passersby, tourists, indigenous and immigrants and refugees, everybody all together. We understand that broadly speaking, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But to clearly specify you shall love the alien as yourself and highlight it over there was kind of new finding to me. It's kind of, that's strange. And not only that, when you think about it, they rhyme together. As far as in English translation, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, you shall love the alien as yourself, and then whenever 2 sentences rhyme together, you consider that as equal significance, right? And as far as English translations goes, and so that's, so in other words, what it means is that when you say that you shall love your neighbor as yourself, you shall love the alien as yourself, should be read in the same breath and also treated in the same significance. And not only that, lastly, at the end, in verse 34 ends with, "For I am your God." Echoing the verse 2, "You shall be holy." It's God. I'm the Lord your God, and holy. It's a holy command throughout all this, just the overarching whole command. So, in other words, what it means is that we shall you shall love the alien as yourself, the same significance, the same treatment, that you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now that's sort of new, surprising to me. I don't know about you folks, but for me it's kind of surprising to me because when I consider how exclusively tribal and nationalistic Israelites has been throughout the history in terms of their race, their religion, their tradition, their culture, and their ethnicity. Right? You shall love the alien as yourself? Really? But that's kind of my first kind of a surprise. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that I have discovered some major theological discovery here, so I'm not trying to say this, okay? All I'm saying is that that's my first kind of personal analysis after reading more than 2 or 3 times. Now, when you study a bit more in the Old Testament, you begin to understand that there are much more of that happening here. There's you shall love the alien as yourself, and the variations of how to treat the alien as one of you appear more than 90 times. more than 90 times. That's a lot more than you shall love your neighbor. Right? That's a lot. So, in other words, the command to love the alien as yourself is not something that people have remembered for a long time, but it has become a central way of life for Israelites for millennia. For millennia. And we begin to understand why that is, because when we look at the trace and history of Israelites from the beginning, we begin to understand what that is. Because Israelites found themselves that they were an alienated people, and they were aliens and strangers. From the Abraham and Sarah, they were venturing into strange land, becoming aliens in a strange land, and in slavery for about 400 years in the land of Egypt, for 400 years, and they were alien settlers in the land of Canaan. And then they found themselves in several hundred years of exile in strange land, in Babylonian and Assyrian for several hundred years. And after that, therefore, after destruction of the Jerusalem temple, they've been strangers and aliens in the foreign land for close to 2,000 years. All their lineage, their tradition, their self-identity of Israelites were grounded in the setting of alienation. And then it continues in verse 34, we begin to understand. It says, "For you were aliens in the land of Egypt." And it continues in chapter 22, God also reminded them again, "And this is my land, you are the tenant and aliens in my presence." And also, when you read in Chronicles, and King David says, "We are the aliens and strangers in your presence like our forefathers." So the command to love the alien as yourself, they elevated that because they remembered that they were aliens. They were the alienated people throughout their lives. For those of us who are called by God to follow Jesus Christ, we need to remember and remind ourselves that we are aliens and strangers in this world. And just like Israelites, the sense of our displacement, alienation, and this sense of longing should drive us to welcome and embrace and extend hospitality to those who are disenfranchised due to their religious, cultural, and racial differences. Now, in the scripture, when they said aliens and strangers, they consider, scholars consider that as, doesn't really specify what it is, but they consider that as settlers who are temporary settlers who are not blood related with Israel people, but who are people coming attached to the whole people coming from the land of Egypt, and they were passing by, so including all of these people as well. But one thing was very clear. The alienated people, the people who were alien, was the people who were oppressed and marginalized people group, like orphans, like widows, like children. That one thing is clear. But what is interesting is that the Israelites had a deep and meaningful bond with the strangers and aliens of their world. So, in light of all that, in light of loving the alien as yourself, how do we extend our hospitality to those who are strangers and aliens among us? Now, before I go over there, just briefly mention what hospitality in principle and also practice nowadays is a little bit different than what we understood in biblical times and how the Israelites have practiced. Now, we understand as practice of good hospitality is that to putting on a great party, like birthday party, anniversary parties, or kind of great parties like that, and invite people and being hospitable to people. That's how we generally understand as a hospitable. In biblical times, when we understand hospitality, it was much more of a basic in providing food and shelter protection for strangers and aliens among them. It was much more related to their daily livelihood. So that's why you read in verse 2 and onward, you read that there was command to not to take everything of your harvest crops, leave some over there so that the oppressed people, orphans and widows and aliens and strangers would graze. So provided their physical necessity, and also at the same time providing them with a social dignity. So that's how we understand it biblically on what hospitality was. So in light of all this, what does it mean for us to actually to practice radical hospitality to those who are strangers and aliens among us? Well, there are many different ways, right? You can think about all the different ways of doing that. So let me just start with a very small step. How we greet one another, especially how we greet the strangers and aliens among us, who are different than us and racially and culturally. So at the beginning of the worship service, I asked you, where are you from? Where are you from? Where are you from? It's okay, you can shout out. Where are you from? Nebraska, right? Montreal, that's great. All right. All right. Great. Good job. That's good. Yeah, it's a blessing. So ask me that question. It all depends. It all depends. Are you asking me my geographically or nationally, culturally, traditionally? Are you talking about religiously, spiritually? Are you talking about denominational-wise? Are you talking about politically and philosophically, ideologically? What do you mean by where I'm from, right? It all depends. And also, the question, where are you from, is all depending on where you are and who is asking to whom. And depending on that, you can perceive as a form of hospitality or form of hostility. So let's say if you were in Vancouver, multicultural cities like this, let's say if a middle-aged Asian male or female is asking, where are you from, to a middle-aged Asian or female, that's considered to be perceived as a form of hospitality, right? And with a little bit of smile that will enhance the greeting, right? But let's say if you were in cities like Kelowna, that's where I'm from, not originally, Kelowna, where about 80%, over 80% of people are consisted of so-called Caucasian or white people. If, let's say in that city, if, let's say, middle-aged white male or female is asking, where are you from, to a middle-aged Asian male or female, that could be perceived as a form of hostility. And it doesn't really matter whether you smile when you're asking, where are you from? It's not going to improve. As a matter of fact, it's not just a form of hostility, but also could be actually considered as a microaggression, so-called, and also considered to be racial harassment. Now, I just want to say that I'm not a hyper-social justice sort of person. I just don't want to try to see and see injustice in every human interaction. That's not me. I just want to tell my story. And I don't represent my group. I don't know who my groups are. I don't represent Asians. I don't represent Koreans. I just represent myself as well. Okay? So I just want to speak about my experience. Is that okay? Yes? All right. So when I was in Kelowna, I've been asked this, where are you from, like hundreds of times, okay? Like, from mostly from Caucasian and white people. I mean, for lack of a better word, I just put it out there. From every occasion, every place where I went. Every people that I almost met, like, where are you from? Where are you from? It's like in the school, in the church, in the shopping mall, in the restaurant, in a coffee place, and like in the bank, in every place where I am. Even in a Starbucks, when I'm sitting there, people ask me, where are you from? Like even when I was sitting by YMCA, in the steam room, I'm sitting there and I'm sweating, and this person right across me say, where are you from? So I'm kind of like, why do people ask me this, where are you from? Am I that different? Am I that exotic? So my first response usually goes like this, well, I'm from Kelowna. So that's sort of sometimes annoys people, right? Because so they follow up question, where are you originally from? So I say, Edmonton? And then I go, oh, you mean my nationality? Like, I'm Canadian, I was born in Canada. I wasn't born in Canada, I just wanted to stop the conversation. So ultimately, a few of them, well, where are your parents from? Are you Chinese or Japanese? They never asked me, are you Korean? Now, I'm sure that when people ask that question, I'm sure that they do it out of good intention. I get that. I really get that. They do it in good intention. They wanted to know you, right? I get that. It's not that I'm trying to fight and pick a fight or anything like that. It's just not that. It's just, I know that. But in the mind of a person who's been asked that question hundreds and hundreds of times, how does that person feel? Like, what goes through this person's mind? Once again, you feel like you've been stereotyped, profiled, racialized. You feel like you've been cornered and colonized. And once again, you've been put it on, reduced into a simple binary, kind of an identification based on color of your skin. Once again, you've been kind of reminded yourself that you've been reorientalized and alienated. Not that I felt that way. I read someplace an article, some feminist, Asian feminist. I just used to feel kind of annoyed. I didn't feel kind of racialized, kind of annoyed. And nowadays when people ask me that question, I politely answer like that. Originally where I'm from Korea. Not North, South Korea. I'm from South Korea. I mean, there's nothing to fight over it, right? And I thought I was the only one who's been asked this question over and over again. But my children, who are second generation people in second generation, they've been asked this question over and over again, wherever they went. That's interesting, isn't it? And then I come to Vancouver. I've been only asked this 3 or 4 times in the entire last 1.5 years. And I'm like, what's going on here? Am I not special anymore? In Kelowna, they used to tell me that, yeah, you look like Jackie Chan. You look like Bruce Lee, right? I have never been called that this year in Vancouver. I was like, what's going on? Love the alien as yourself. And how do we extend the hospitality to strangers in how we greet one another? I'm not saying that we shouldn't ask, where are you from? There must be a better way to do that. It's a very simple way to put that. You can still ask that question, right? To the strangers and aliens, but you can, first of all, you can just introduce yourself. Hey, my name is Richard Chung. And then you can be glad to see you, and then you can have good conversations for a while, and then after a while, hey, I was born in Vancouver, but I'm from England originally, so where are you from? So we can do that, right? We churches are really bad at welcoming strangers and aliens. Did you notice that? Did you? We're good at welcoming one another, with who we know, but we are very bad at welcoming strangers and aliens. I've been to many different churches as a visitors and just walk in and they always say we are a welcoming church. Have you ever seen a church, have you heard church that we are unwelcoming church? You have never seen that. But a lot of churches that I've been to, even other churches, they really suck at welcoming. Really bad at welcoming. And some churches I went to, they just make you, like first time I'm there for the first time, they make you stand up in the middle of the service. What the heck is going on there? I mean, why do you do that? You gather all of your courage, and then you want to come to church, and a stranger, and then they make you stand up in the middle of the service, and then they want to welcome you. You're like, I'm horrified. I'm not going to that church anymore. We are suck at welcoming at our church, folks. And the strangers and aliens. Let me just finish with just a brief story. So how do you love the alien as yourself? How do you greet the strangers? So this happened like a few years ago when I was in Kelowna. So I had a Sunday off, and I wanted to visit one of the churches, local churches. They were really good at praise and worship team. So I wanted to go over there just to experience what that was about. Yeah, I think it was a Lutheran church. So church size about this size of church, so I was there like about 15 or 20 minutes before the worship service, and I went over there. They're like 100% Caucasian, white people. So I stood up, So they're all there. So they had a coffee and conversation like before worship service. So people mingled one another, right? And they had a coffee, and they're all kind of clique and coffee. And so I took my own cup of coffee and just stood there and trying to kind of bring myself. It just wasn't happening. Okay? It's like people were just, and they were like looking at me from the side, like looking at that, and they were talking to themselves. I was like, are they talking about me now? So it's like I feel all kind of alienated right over there. I feel like I want to go home. Really, that's how I felt. I want to go. I don't want to be here. Okay? Why did I come earlier? Why should I come just a bit later so I don't have? So that was what was happening, but. Right at that moment, I saw this middle-aged, white, bald guy from the end of the hall approached me with a bright smile. And he said, "Hello, my name is Bob. Glad to see you." And he extended his hand to shake. So I was about to shake his hand, and I saw his hand, he only had 3 fingers. 3 fingers. He was missing 2 fingers, right? I was like, I ain't shaking hand with a 3-finger guy. But I shook hand because that's his way of welcoming. So until worship service, he had a good conversation with me for about 15 minutes, and I forgot what we talked about. I forgot the sermon, what the sermon was about on that Sunday, but I remember Bob. I remember Bob. I remember his smile. I remember his genuine conversation. And I remember his hand with only 3 fingers. All authentic. All authentic. And because of Bob, I would go and visit that church again. As an alien, as a stranger into that church, I was welcomed by this one genuine person extending hospitality. And she treated me like one of them. You shall love the alien as yourself. We can start small by genuinely, authentically greeting the strangers among us. So we're going to collect the offering, so let's pray for the offering. God, we give you thanks for you have welcomed